Hey, welcome back to the Bits of Good Bootcamp. In this video, we're going to talk about handling events in React. And before we can talk about how we handle events in React, it's worth talking about how we would handle events outside of React in just a regular JavaScript and HTML enabled website. And the answer to that question is we would use something very similar to what we have here. So notice that the event name is here and it's in all lowercase. And then our event handler, we're actually passing in the name, we're actually calling the event handler function with the parentheses, and it's a string. So this is how it would be done in just like a regular HTML website. And honestly, I'm not a huge fan of that because it looks kind of weird to me to have a string here where you're actually calling a function, but it's like a string. Intuitively, it doesn't seem like you're actually calling a function because you think it's just going to be treated as a string. But in a regular and HTML JavaScript website, this would be the proper way to do it. And whenever this button was clicked, the activate lasers function is going to be called. And so the way that we do it with React is a little different, and I actually think it's more intuitive. So let's take a look at that. All right, here we go. Notice the first difference is that the event name is actually camel cased. So it's on and then uppercase C click. This is kind of nice. I just like reading the camel case more than the all lowercase. And then we're actually using our curly bracket syntax that we've used before with React JSX, and we are passing in the name of our function. So the way that you should think about this is really what we're doing is we're passing a function reference to the onClick event handler here. And so in my mind, this just makes a lot more sense because this is being evaluated as a JavaScript expression inside of the curly brackets inside of JSX, and it's really a function reference. So we're telling this button, okay, here is the function. I'm giving you a reference to the function I want you to execute every single time somebody clicks on you. So yeah, I think it's very intuitive and it makes a lot of sense. So let's go to the next slide. And another thing that's worth talking about is how we prevent default behavior. So for example, if you're submitting a form and you are clicking that submit button, the default behavior is going to be to actually like reload the page. But sometimes we might not want to do that if we're using a React application because we're handling sending the form data in the back end, like or kind of like behind the scenes within our React app using something like Axios, and we don't actually need the web page to refresh. We don't want to execute another request like that. So it's necessary to prevent the default action of that submit button. And so the way that we would do that is inside of our event handler function, which we see here. We're actually going to call e.preventDefault, and notice that e is really the event object that's being passed in, and it's a synthetic event, so this is just kind of like React implementation details. We don't need to worry about it. It doesn't have any cross-browser compatibility issues, and you don't really need to get too far into it, but technically it is a synthetic event. And so here we see that we're preventing the default action, and then we're console logging something. And handle click, of course, this is our event handler that we're passing into this onClick function of this href tag. All right, let's keep going. Now let's talk about event handlers when we're using classes as opposed to just functional components, or class components instead. And something that's really important to notice here, so we have our handle click. This is our event handler, and we're changing a piece of internal state. And so the way we change internal state, if you remember, is we say this.setState, correct? And so the important thing here is that we need this to point to the this of the toggle class of the component. And you should remember sometimes in JavaScript, it's really important to make sure that this is pointing to the proper this. And so we need to do this explicitly here by binding the handle click function to the current this of the toggle class. And so you see that's being done here in the constructor. So we're saying this.handleClick is equal to this.handleClick.bind this. So this is completely necessary in order for this this here, which I realize is repetitive, in order for that to reference the proper this context. So if you ever have a React component and something's not working the way you're expecting it, like a click handler or something, an event handler, is not behaving properly, it's probably because you forgot to bind this to the event handler. And then finally, see at the very bottom here, we're setting our event handler just like you would expect, just like we did in the functional component. Okay, let's actually just take a quick look here, just so we can make sure that this does in fact work. Okay, let's pull this out so you can see it's the same code. And then I'm going to click on, off, and just like we expect, based on what the toggle state is, it's displaying a different word on the button. And I want to take a second here and actually prove to you that if I didn't bind the this, that it wouldn't work properly. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, and then I'm going to try doing this again, and you're going to see that it's not changing. And the reason that it's not changing is because inside of the handle click, this is not referring to the proper this that we're expecting it. So if we do console.log here, and I'll open up the console so you can see. Oh, well, it seems like it's not logging it. Let's see if it logs it this time. No. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so when I uncomment the bind here, it's logging the proper thing. So this is our React component object, the proper this. And then now when I take that away and we try, it's just logging something that's too large for the console to see, which is unfortunate. But hopefully this serves to convince you of the necessity of binding this for event handlers. All right, let's go back to our slides. Okay, so now the final thing that I want to show you when it comes to event handlers is that sometimes it's useful for us to actually pass some parameters to the event handler other than just the event. It's because every single on-click is always going to pass the event, just like we saw here, like this handle click, it's actually receiving the event, which we're not using in this case, but I think there's another example here, right? The handle click is actually receiving the event, but sometimes you might want to pass more than that. For example, if you have a list of something, you might want to know the ID of that item in the list while you're rendering it. And so what you might do is something like this. These are both valid options. My personal favorite is to do this first one with an arrow expression. And so essentially what we're doing is we're declaring an anonymous function in line here that is receiving the event and then returning our event handler that we have provided the ID beforehand. So this ID exists in the context just like somewhere above this code, and then the E that's coming from here. And so this is going to be returning the actual event handler that we want to be using. And in this example as well, it's something similar. And what it's doing is it's using the bind function of JavaScript, and it's binding the this, which is like what we saw before in the constructor. And then anything that's passed in apart from the first parameter is just going to be forwarded as an argument to whatever the function that is being bound. So in this case, ID will be forwarded to this delete row. Yeah. So I personally prefer doing it the first way because it's just a little bit more explicit and it's a little easier to read in my opinion, but the second way is also valid. Okay, that's it for everything regarding event handlers in React. See you in the next video.